I never thought I would be in this situation. Never in a million years. But here I was, standing in my own kitchen, heart pounding, stomach twisting, staring at my son-in-law like he was a man I had never seen before, a man I shouldn't have been looking at this way, and yet I couldn't stop. It all started that afternoon. My daughter Claire had asked me to come over and watch the house while she and her husband Daniel were out. Their little getaway for the weekend was supposed to be a chance for them to reconnect. But Claire called me last night, saying she had a last-minute work emergency and had to fly out early. Daniel would be home alone for another day before heading to meet her. She didn't want the house empty overnight, so she asked if I could stay. I told her yes without thinking much of it. After all, Daniel and I had always had a good relationship. He was charming, easygoing, and had a boyish charm that had drawn Claire in from the moment they met. She was madly in love with him, and from everything I could tell, he loved her too. But that didn't mean I hadn't noticed the way he carried himself, the way he exuded a quiet confidence that made women's eyes linger on him just a second too long. I wasn't blind, I wasn't naive, and I wasn't dead inside either. When I arrived, Daniel was in the backyard, shirtless, sweat glistening on his toned torso as he worked on something near the patio. My mouth went dry. He looked up and flashed me that effortless grin. "Hey, glad you could make it," he said, wiping his forehead with the back of his hand. "Sorry, I lost track of time. Let me grab a shirt." "Don't bother on my account," I replied before I could stop myself. It was meant to be a harmless joke, but his smirk told me he didn't take it that way. He didn't grab a shirt. Instead, we spent the afternoon chatting, drinking lemonade, and enjoying the warm sun. The conversation was light, easy, and familiar, until it wasn't. Until I found myself paying too much attention to the way he laughed, the way his eyes lingered on mine for just a second longer than necessary. When the sun started to set, we moved inside, and that's when things took a turn I hadn't anticipated. I was in the kitchen rinsing out my glass when I felt him behind me, not touching, but close enough that I could feel his presence. My pulse quickened. "I never realized how young you look," he murmured. I turned to face him, my breath catching in my throat. His eyes were locked on mine, dark with something that shouldn't have been there. Something that made my entire body feel hot and tight all at once. "Daniel," I started, but I didn't know what I was about to say. Maybe I was going to tell him to stop. Maybe I was going to tell him this was a bad idea. Or maybe I was about to say something that would make it all worse. He didn't let me finish. "You've always been stunning," he said, stepping closer. "I noticed the first time I met you." I should have walked away. I should have laughed it off and changed the subject. But I didn't, because the truth was, I had noticed him too, from the very first moment, and I had buried that thought deep, deep down, where I thought it would never surface again. But now, standing in my daughter's kitchen, with my son-in-law looking at me like I was the only woman in the world, I felt something shift inside me. Something dangerous. Something I didn't want to stop. He reached out, his fingers brushing against my wrist. It was the lightest of touches, but it sent a shiver racing up my spine. "You should go shower," I said, my voice hoarse. "You're all sweaty." His lips twitched like he knew exactly what I was doing, deflecting, running, but he didn't push. He nodded, stepping back, but the tension didn't fade. If anything, it stretched between us like a taut wire, ready to snap. "I'll be down in a bit," he said, his voice low. I watched him disappear up the stairs, my entire body thrumming. I needed to leave. I needed to get out of this house, away from him, before I did something I couldn't take back. But I didn't move, because deep down, in the darkest, most forbidden part of me, I didn't want to. And that terrified me more than anything else. The sound of the shower running upstairs echoed in the quiet house. I stood frozen in the kitchen, gripping the edge of the counter, my breath shallow. I needed to leave, needed to walk out the front door and drive home before anything else could happen. Before I did something I would regret. But my feet didn't move. My body felt heavy, anchored by the weight of my own desires, my own reckless thoughts that I had kept at bay for too long. My pulse was unsteady, my hands trembling as I reached for my glass of lemonade, taking a slow sip as if that would steady me. It didn't. The longer I stood there, the more aware I became of everything around me, the sound of the water rushing upstairs, the heat lingering in the air from the summer day, the way my dress clung to my skin. Every nerve in my body was on edge, alive in a way that made me feel restless, reckless. I took a deep breath, finally willing myself to move. I walked toward the living room, needing distance, needing to clear my head. I sat on the couch, crossing my legs tightly, trying to regain control. This was insane. But then I heard the shower turn off. My breath hitched. I should have left before he came back downstairs. I knew that. But I was still sitting there, unmoving, as I listened to the soft sounds of footsteps above me, the rustling of fabric, the quiet creak of the floorboards as he moved. My skin prickled, every sense heightened. A few moments later, he appeared at the top of the stairs, a towel slung low on his hips, droplets of water trailing down his bare chest. My stomach tightened. I swallowed hard, forcing my eyes to his face. He was watching me, and the look in his eyes sent a rush of something dark and exhilarating through my veins. "You didn't leave," he said, his voice smooth, calm. But there was something else beneath it, something knowing. I could have made an excuse. I could have told him I was just about to go, but I didn't say anything. I just sat there, my hands clenching the fabric of my dress, my mind waging a war against my own body. He descended the stairs slowly, deliberately, his eyes never leaving mine. When he reached the bottom, he paused, tilting his head slightly. "You sure you don't want to run?" he asked, his tone teasing, but there was an edge to it. I let out a slow breath, trying to steady myself. "I should," I admitted. He stepped closer, just a fraction, but it was enough to make my pulse stutter. "But you won't." I didn't answer, because he was right. I watched as he reached for the refrigerator, grabbing a bottle of water, twisting the cap off and taking a slow sip. I could see the way his throat moved as he swallowed, the way his muscles shifted with every slight movement. It was ridiculous how much I was noticing, how much my mind was clinging to every detail. "I shouldn't be thinking like this," I murmured, more to myself than to him. He set the bottle down and leaned against the counter, arms crossed, watching me. "But you are." I exhaled sharply, shaking my head. "This is dangerous." His lips twitched in a smirk. "Is it?" I shot him a look. "Daniel." He straightened, taking a slow step toward me, then another. "Tell me to stop." I opened my mouth. The words were right there, sitting on the tip of my tongue. But they didn't come out. Because I wasn't sure I wanted them to. And that was the moment I knew. I was already too far gone. My breath was uneven, my thoughts tangled, my entire body buzzing in a way I hadn't felt in years. I knew I was walking a fine line, but it didn't stop me from watching as Daniel took another step closer, closing the space between us until I could feel the warmth radiating off his skin. I should have moved. I should have put an end to this right then and there. But I didn't. Instead, I stayed rooted to the spot, my fingers tightening against the fabric of my dress, my stomach twisting with anticipation I had no right to feel. "You're thinking too much," he murmured, his voice lower now, almost coaxing. I swallowed hard. "I have a lot to think about." His lips curled in a knowing smile. "No, you don't." I shook my head, trying to clear it. "Daniel, this is wrong." His eyes darkened, his gaze holding mine. "Then tell me to stop." I hesitated, the words there but caught in my throat, tangled with everything I was trying to suppress. I could still hear the rational part of my mind screaming at me to walk away, to put an end to this before it went any further. But then he lifted a hand, fingers grazing the side of my arm, light as a whisper. My skin erupted in chills, every nerve in my body coming alive under his touch. It was barely anything, just the softest brush of his fingertips, but it felt like too much. "I should go," I said again, but my voice lacked conviction. His hand moved to my wrist, his grip gentle but firm. But you won't. I closed my eyes for a moment, trying to gather some semblance of control, but when I opened them, he was still there, his expression unreadable but his intent clear. I wanted to blame him for this, wanted to tell myself that he was the one pushing, that I was just a passive participant in something I had no control over. But that was a lie, because the truth was, I had already crossed a line the moment I didn't pull away. He released my wrist, his fingers trailing down until they brushed against my palm. "I don't think you want to leave," he said, his tone almost teasing but laced with something deeper. I exhaled shakily, my hands clenching at my sides. "This isn't fair." "Fair?" His eyebrows lifted slightly. "What's fair?" I didn't have an answer for that, because nothing about this was fair, not to Claire, not to me. And yet I still wasn't moving, still wasn't stopping what was happening. His fingers traced lightly over the back of my hand, his gaze never wavering. "Tell me what you want." I let out a short, breathless laugh, shaking my head. "You're impossible." "Maybe." His lips curled at the edges. "Or maybe I just see things clearly." I swallowed. "And what do you see?" His hand lifted again, fingers grazing the side of my neck, tilting my chin up just slightly. "I see a woman who doesn't want to leave." My heart slammed against my ribs, my breath caught in my throat. His touch was still light, still barely there, but it sent my entire body into a spiral of heat and confusion. "This is crazy," I whispered. "Maybe," he said again, voice soft. But I think we both stopped caring about that a while ago. I should have pulled away. I should have stepped back and erased the space between us, created distance before this got out of hand. But I didn't, because the truth was, I didn't want to. Not anymore. His fingers lingered at my chin, his thumb grazing my skin, so lightly it felt like an electric current dancing across my nerves. The air between us was thick, heavy, charged with something unspoken yet undeniable. My breaths came short and shallow, my chest rising and falling in uneven intervals as I stared up at him, waiting for something, anything, to break the tension. "I should go," I said, but my voice was weak, a mere whisper against the silence of the room. Daniel's lips curved into something that was almost a smile, but there was something darker behind it, something knowing. "You've been saying that for a while now." I swallowed hard, my throat dry. "Because I should." "But you haven't." His voice was smooth, deliberate, each word sinking into me like a slow drip of something intoxicating. "And you won't." I opened my mouth to argue, to deny, to push back against the truth that we both knew. But before I could, he moved closer, his breath warm against my skin, his presence swallowing me whole. Every inch of me was alert, hyper-aware of his proximity, the faint scent of his aftershave mixed with the remnants of soap clinging to his skin. A shiver ran through me, and I knew he noticed because his fingers traced an almost invisible pattern along the line of my jaw. "You're afraid," he murmured. "I'm not," I lied, though the tremor in my voice gave me away. He tilted his head slightly, his gaze locked onto mine with an intensity that made my knees feel weak. "Then why are you shaking?" "Because you do this to me. Because I've never wanted something so wrong so badly. Because I can't think straight when you look at me like this." I didn't say any of those things. Instead, I forced a breath past my lips, hoping it would steady me. It didn't. "This is dangerous." Daniel didn't step back. If anything, he closed the distance even more, his body a wall of heat against mine. "It is," he agreed. "But that's never stopped you before, has it?" I stiffened slightly, his words striking a chord that was too close to the truth. I had always chased the thrill, always found myself teetering on the edge of what was right and what was reckless. I had spent my life craving something more, something exhilarating, something that made me feel alive. And this? This was exactly that. I inhaled sharply, feeling my resolve weaken. Claire. His jaw tightened for the briefest moment, but he didn't back away. Isn't here. That doesn't mean she won't find out. He searched my face, his expression unreadable. Do you want her to? The question stunned me into silence. I should have been offended, should have pushed him away and put an end to this right then and there. But the truth was, part of me had no answer to give. Because the woman standing here right now, caught between temptation and morality, wasn't thinking about consequences. She was thinking about the way Daniel's lips were only inches from hers, about the way his hands had settled at her waist, firm and possessive, about how easy it would be to close the gap and let this moment consume her entirely. His fingers pressed slightly, his grip tightening. "Tell me to stop," he said again, his voice barely above a whisper. I knew that if I did, he would. He wouldn't push me past a line I wasn't willing to cross. But that was the problem, wasn't it? Because I didn't want him to stop. I couldn't stop myself. Not anymore. The moment had already tipped beyond reason, beyond logic, beyond anything I could pretend to resist. My breath hitched as Daniel's hands gripped my waist just a little tighter, his fingers pressing into the thin fabric of my dress. I knew exactly what was about to happen, exactly what I was allowing, and yet I didn't move away. The air between us was thick, charged, humming with an intensity that had been building for far too long. Every part of me screamed to run, to stop this before it was too late, but I was already lost. I had been the moment I walked into this house, the moment I saw him standing there, shirtless, sweat glistening on his skin, looking at me in a way he never should have. His eyes darkened, his gaze flickering to my lips, and then he was leaning in. A breath. A pause. A moment where I could have stopped him, could have put an end to everything, before it spiraled past the point of no return. But I didn't. When his lips brushed against mine, my body betrayed me. Heat flooded my veins, my hands gripping at his arms, pulling him closer when I should have been pushing him away. The first kiss was slow, hesitant, as if we were both testing the waters of something dangerous, something forbidden. But that hesitation didn't last. He groaned against my mouth, deepening the kiss, one hand sliding up my back, fingers tangling in my hair as he pulled me closer. I melted into him, my body pressing against his as the last of my resistance crumbled into nothing. It was reckless. It was wrong. It was everything I had told myself I wouldn't do. And yet, it felt inevitable. I gasped as his lips trailed down my jaw, my neck, his hands exploring, teasing, tempting. My fingers slid over the hard planes of his chest, his skin hot beneath my touch. Everything about this was a betrayal, a step too far, but it didn't matter. Not in that moment. Time blurred. Every rational thought drowned beneath the waves of heat crashing through me. We moved through the house in a tangled mess of hands and mouths and whispered names. Clothes discarded. Boundaries shattered. Every touch, every kiss, every breath only made it harder to remember why this was a mistake. But then, just as quickly as it had started, reality came crashing down. A sharp, piercing ring cut through the silence. My phone. I froze. Daniel did too, his breath hot against my shoulder, his grip tightening for just a moment before he pulled away. The ringing continued, insistent, jarring, shattering the illusion we had built around ourselves. My hands shook as I reached for my purse, fumbling for the device. Claire's name flashed across the screen. My stomach dropped. Guilt flooded my veins like ice water, chilling every burning ember Daniel had ignited inside me. I couldn't answer. Not like this. Not with my skin still flushed from his touch, my lips still tingling from his kiss. But I had to. I swallowed hard, forcing myself to take a steadying breath before pressing the phone to my ear. "Hey," I said, my voice hoarse, uneven. "Hey, Mom, just checking in. Everything okay?" Daniel was watching me, his expression unreadable. "Yeah," I lied, forcing a smile she couldn't see. Everything's fine. How's the trip? She started talking, her voice filled with excitement, completely unaware of the betrayal hanging thick in the air between me and her husband. My heart pounded so hard it felt like she could hear it through the phone. I needed to get out of here. As soon as she hung up, I stood quickly, grabbing my things, refusing to look at Daniel as I moved toward the door. "Where are you going?" he asked, his voice calm, but I could hear the tension beneath it. "Home," I said firmly. This was a mistake." He didn't argue. He didn't try to stop me. He just watched as I walked away, his eyes burning into my back like a brand. The drive home was a blur. My thoughts raced, my body still humming with everything I had just done, everything I had just allowed to happen. I walked into my house feeling different, changed, tainted. I stood in the darkness, gripping the edge of my kitchen counter, trying to make sense of what I had done. The worst part? I wasn't sure I regretted it.